Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock-flavoured podcast. 2025 rolls on, and, well, things just get weirder, don't they? And somehow, it's been 18 months since we last talked Hawkmoon here on the podcast, so it's high time Dave returned so we can see what's going on in the battle against the Dark Empire of Gran Bretagne. And of course, to get the skinny on new SÖNUS developments. We're finally up to the fourth Hawkmoon book then, The Runestaff, also released in the USA as The Secret of the Runestaff. Mike was firmly in the midst of his 3-day book period here, which, by his own admission, meant for breakneck pace and developments, but perhaps a lack of scope to expand upon the ideas within. So that means that this entire series, which you can take as 4 short novels or read as one larger one, and the Fantasy Masterworks compiled edition of the history of the Runestaff runs to a smidge over 600 pages, was completed in just 12 days. That's barely faster than the time it takes us to podcast about it all. Yet, 55 years later, we're still reading and talking about them. So the ideas in there are obviously still of interest and still carry resonance. So, join us. So we're back in Derry and Toms, and of course, for the first time in 2025, I'm absolutely delighted and overjoyed to welcome back Dave. Welcome back, Dave.
Hello! Glad to be here.
And, well, what a wacky year it already is in your part of the world, with wildfires and other things going on, let's say. But how are you?
Well, it's pretty interesting to read this nice, fun book about a group of people banding together to fight the Dark Empire when my own country is back under control of other dark, villainous, horrific people. And that's been a pretty exciting few weeks of just terror and villainy and immigrants being rounded up and shipped off to who knows where by some crazy government organization. Let's see, other horrific things. We have a guy who is basically a neo-crusader and a total alcoholic, useless piece of shit, just confirmed as the defense secretary.
Oh, fucking hell, that guy. Hesgeth,
yeah, with all that fun stuff. God, I mean... Oh, yeah, the richest and most powerful man in the world who owns the biggest social media platform in the world, just gave a fucking Nazi salute on live television, and everybody else acting like, well, no, he's just autistic, and it was a Roman salute, which is all a bunch of fucking bullshit, not holding this piece of crap accountable. So that's been pretty frustrating.
Yeah. You know what, there's a passage in what we're going to read, and I mean, we'll get to it. But it never seems to not be the case with whatever we read on this fucking podcast that we end up face-palming and thinking, had we read this a few years ago, it might not be as resonant as it is right now.
Yeah.
But fucking hell, every single time we read a book, we seem to pick a time or be thrust into a time where what we're reading just becomes more resonant than it was 5 years ago, maybe as resonant or more resonant than it was when it was written.
Moorcock is eternal. What can you say, man?
Yeah, it's fucking crackers, isn't it? And when I spoke to him before Christmas for the birthday show, one of the prompts I had, which I'm hoping to follow up with him when I talk to him again, is, a lot of these books were written at a specific time in response to specific events. But what do you make of the way the world has developed in the 50 plus years in some cases since you've written these books? It's kind of tacky to say, whoa, how does it feel to be such a prescient author? Because we've read stuff like The Black Corridor, we've read all these books which have all these, what at the time would hopefully have been reactions to things that had happened in recent history, but hopefully, warnings of the future, not the actual fucking future come to pass. And yeah, I don't know how I'm going to couch that conversation with him, because I talked to him in December and he was in Texas, and I'll be talking to him again at some point in the next couple of months, and I think he'll still be in Texas. He won't have gone back to Paris yet. And he's right there in the middle of it, watching it, observing it all, just as you are, and being a full fucking part of it. And it's baffling, depressing. It's tough watching it from this side of the pond. I can't imagine how it must feel where you are, because of course we've had our own problems over here with a wacky government being rampaging to the right and being more and more fucking densely stupid in all of their protestations about everything, yet still managing to get things to come to pass. But I don't think I ever thought in a million years it would get as bad as it could potentially get. And there we are. We are in the black corridor right now, aren't we?
Yeah, there you go. The tragic millennium's begun.
We'll talk about more positive things shortly, but we're here to look at the Runestaff, published 1969. 24 years after we smashed the Nazis last time around, and yet here we are, as you just pointed out, with what has come to be the world's most powerful man, and now being at the heart of the United States government, throwing a Nazi salute not once but twice on a podium with the livery of the United States government and the United States president on it. It's fucking bonkers.
Yeah,
it really is. It's hard to get your head around, but yeah, here we are. On a more positive note, right? Yeah. I always ask you when we kick off for an update on what is going on with SÖNUS. And I know a part of the answer to this question because you've clued me into some of it delightfully. That's right. But give us an update on what's going on with SÖNUS.
So I am very happy to announce that we have just recently finished recording the next album. February 9th is when we're going to do final overdubs and mixing of the last song that we recorded for it, which I will tease has some flutes on it in a very psychedelic, groovy little happenstance there. And the 23rd will be the final session, February 23rd. That'll be the day the album is finally complete. We'll be sending it out to labels. Hopefully, release date won't be too much further in the future. But I'm very proud of this one. We the first two obviously I recorded in this very room, which I'm transdimensionally speaking to you from Derry and Toms from. Well, we'll figure that aspect out. But
you're not in your homemade cardboard recording studio today, though.
Well, I mean, basically the only thing missing is the cardboard box. I had to throw that out. That thing was just kind of collapsing in my garage after that. But yeah, so this one, no click track, full band, live in the studio. That's how all the songs were recorded on this one. And it sounds like, my favorite kind of albums, which were recorded that way, There are little teeny mistakes in there here and there, and that just makes me go, hoo-hoo, it was live. Yeah. We actually played it, and it sounds this good. So I'm really, really excited about that, and hopefully people will dig that. And, some ambitious stuff on that album, so it's going to be pretty cool whenever y'all can hear it.
Well, having had a sneak preview of some of the tracks, I can't wait to get the fully finished and polished version. I say polished. I fucking love the imperfections of live music and live performances. And yourself, we have talked about this many times before. My favourite era of Maiden was the Paul Di'Anno era.
Same.
And the great thing about the first Iron Maiden album is they rocked up in the studio and they played it. And when you go back to the earliest Priest albums, they rocked up in the studio and they played it. And, it's like the irony with Priest is a lot of people go, oh, yeah, Unleashed in the East, greatest live album ever produced. But they actually went back and tinkered with that and mastered it and added additional production to it and polished up Rob Halford's vocals. And much as I love Unleashed in the East, it sounds like far too much a polished product when you listen to something like
Sad Wings of Destiny.
Sad Wings of Destiny. When you listen to Sad Wings of Destiny, and that's an album that just turned up, played in the studio with a producer and an engineer who didn't really understand rock music, it doesn't fucking matter because they played it and it sounds amazing. And that's what those tracks that you sent me, that's the kind of quality that they've got.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, thank you. Oh, man. Oh my God! I'm sorry. I'm at a loss for words, dude. You just compared it to Sad Wings of Destiny. Holy crap! I will totally take that compliment. I could only hope to reach that
funny
level.
enough, the last time you sent me a sneak preview, I think I talked about Slade, didn't I? I said it had Slade-like energy, and that's a similar kind of thing. You know, Slade playing live, just fucking raw, unbridled energy. I'm not saying the music is like the music on Sad Wings of Destiny, but it's the kind of energy that you don't get so much in modern music. I mean, this is one of the beauties, I think, of Bandcamp. This is one of the brilliant things about finding music on Bandcamp, is the sheer amount of bands on there that are rocking out and recording it.
Yeah.
I think my ears are now getting really attuned to things like auto-tune on vocalists and things like that. And man, it really fucking pisses me off when I listen to stuff and it just sounds perfect. I mean, quite apart from the fact that auto-tune is the scourge of the music industry and people sound like AI reproductions of something. It's fucking hideous.
Totally.
But I think rock music has suffered from overproduction for a long, long, long time.
100%.
And when you get that raw sound of, I mean, you know, so I gotta say, I think you might have checked it out. I posted some things on the Discord, and there was a song called Owl Bear, which was about 35 seconds long, by a band the name of which I forget. And yes, it sounds like it's recorded in a garage, but that is a fucking million times more exciting to me than something that's overproduced. And that's the beauty of Bandcamp. But the great thing about the tracks that you sent me is that they will get polished, I'm sure. They will get mastered, and you know.
Just
but
a
actually,
touch.
yeah, when you've got something as raw and as energetic sounding as that, and with the, it's like using noise reduction on a video or something. Once you polish out all the grain,
Yeah.
it looks shit and it looks like Vaseline.
Yeah.
Leave me some grain. And I'm not a musician, I'm not a music journalist, but I would say that's the closest I can get when it comes to my rock music. Leave me some fucking grain intact.
Definitely. Yeah. The only thing that's left is just like slight minor EQ things just to have things a little bit more clear. But I mean, yeah, all the tracks, you know, even the overdubs just to thicken out the sound, because, you know, otherwise you just have, okay, here's one rhythm guitar track and it's just on this side, you know, for panning. So do an overdub, but even that's just done in one take live all the way through. And same thing with the vocals. I do one take all the way through and then another take doubling up sometimes. And that's pretty much it. The leads are what I played live. Unless I really fucked up, then okay, then I might punch in. If it's just like total slop. But like for the most part though, like 90% of it is just exactly what I played when we played through that take live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Can't wait to hear it. I mean, because, you know, I can listen to those tracks at my leisure, but I can't wait to, in figurative speaking, spin it. And get it on loud. So looking forward to that. And of course, you know, once it's out there, we'll let everybody know on the podcast, all of our listeners, it's out there and it's live and it's ready to be accessed.
There you go. And we will be doing vinyl, even if we pay for it ourselves. This album will be coming out on vinyl. I will make that a possibility. We got amazing art by Peter Andrew Jones, which I paid the license, and so that is coming out. That's gonna be a vinyl. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, legendary British artist Peter Andrew Jones.
Oh yeah,
who will be familiar to many, many listeners of this. You know, not only for the fact that he's a legendary artist and he's done many, many album covers and various other things, but to a lot of the kind of kids like me who were the nerdy kids like me, he did covers for things like fighting fantasy books. You know, in the 80s, I'm pretty sure he did the Starship Traveller cover, which is still burned into my memory from having that when I was like 12, 13 years old. Mind-blowing, beautiful sci-fi cover, but with like a you know, not hard sci-fi, a beautiful fantasy tinged, you know, lean muscular figures and definition. Oh yeah, great stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you've given me a sneak peek of that, and it's fucking great as well. I can't wait to see that on a vinyl cover, on a 12-inch album sleeve.
Oh yeah,
fucking rocking. Yeah, can't wait. But what are we here to talk about? It's a while since we did the Sword of the Dawn. Not a million years, but it's a while since we did the Sword of the Dawn. So finally, we're back to hit the fourth and final volume in the history of the Runestaff, named the Runestaff, published in 1969. I've got my copy here, which is this is actually a Granada edition, but it's still got the Bob Hyberfield original Mayflower cover. What edition are you reading?
I'm reading, I believe, an original Lancer, like from '69. Like this would be the U.S. version. Let's see here. Yeah, New York Lancer Books. Boom, and it has a cover. It doesn't credit it, but it's really psychedelic. So I don't know if you can Google the Lancer Secret of the Runestaff's what this one's called, the Secret of the Runestaff, and it's just got swirling. You got Emperor Huon up there, and the swirling colors, and Hawkmoon stabbing at him with the sword, and there's some crazy malformed palace in the background. It's a pretty cool cover.
Yeah, it's awesome. And those Lancer covers, those images, those paintings, I don't think have ever been reproduced on British paperbacks. I'm not sure if they were ever reproduced on French or European paperbacks, but never British paperbacks. So it makes them really distinct, and different from the standard British ones. So yeah, lovely. Well, you know what? Let's kick off. Now, we decided, didn't we, that we were going to just rattle through and cover half this book rather than splitting it into 3 podcasts. I think that was a good move because we have quite a nice and neat finish point, chapter 6 of book 2. So we're gonna cover half the book in this, I think. And it kicks off book 1 with a little bit of a recap, as these things do, in italics. I don't think we'll go into that because I'm pretty sure everybody who's listening to this has probably listened to previous episodes. If you haven't, check out our last episodes on the Sword of... In fact, go all the way back to the beginning and listen to our original episodes on the Jewel in the Skull, then our follow-up episodes with Dave on Mad God's Amulet, and last year I think we did the Sword of the Dawn in 2 sittings. Didn't we? I don't think we did it in 3.
Feels like it,
I think we're making progress now, and we're actually getting through these things a little bit faster, because at the end of the day, when Moorcock's written well over 100 books, and we cover other books that aren't Moorcock, if we take 3 episodes to cover a 140-page book, I'm going to be in the grave before we even get to the quest for Tanelorn, let alone the stuff that came later than that. Sorry for you lot. You're all a lot younger than me, but even you'd be grey. You'd have grey hair and a grey beard by the time we got to that. When I was, probably senile and Phil would be changing my pants. But what we are finding is that, and what starts to unfold in this volume, the 4th volume, is that we know that everything was set in motion by Meliadus swearing on the Runestaff, and that kicked everything into gear. And things are going to start to really kick off with this now. But we kick off with a couple of brief chapters that reintroduce us to our villains of the piece. Of course, Baron Meliadus of the Order of the Wolf, who kicked all this off by trying to kidnap Yzelda of Castle Brass, the bloody rotter. Oh, not to mention him and the armies of Gran Breton rampaging across Europe and conquering it in a brutal, murderous fashion. He's there reporting to King Huon, the immortal king of Gran Breton, in his life-sustaining globe throne, a tiny fetus adrift in milky fluid with the golden honeyed voice of a child, in this vast palace lined with hundreds of guards in mantis masks, because of course our beast orders of Gran Breton are all masked in the style and the visage of the beast that represents their order. But this first chapter, the imagery, you know what? You can't knock the imagery in these books, can you? It's absolutely bloody fantastic. It's knocked down amazing stuff. It says, the solid black sphere seemed to shudder momentarily as Baron Meliadus rose. Then the black became shot through with veins of scarlet and white, which slowly spread through the darker shade until it had vanished altogether. The mixture like milk and blood swelled and cleared to reveal a tiny fetus-like shape curled in the centre of the sphere. From the twisted figure peered eyes that were hard, black and sharp, containing an old, indeed an immortal intelligence. This was Huon, King Emperor of Gran Breton and the Dark Empire, Grand Constable of the Order of the Mantis, wielder of absolute power over tens of millions of souls, the ruler who would live forever, and in whose name Baron Meliadus had conquered the whole of Europe and beyond. The voice of a golden youth now issued from the golden throne. A golden youth to whom it had belonged had been dead 1,000 years. Oh, that's good stuff. I'm going to have to put my glasses on. It's terrible. I start reading these things and I remember, oh shit, the last half dozen or more episodes. I need to read reading glasses now. It's terrible. This is getting ridiculous.
Oh man, it begins.
Yeah, you just can't beat this imagery. And of course, what Huon is grilling Meliadus on is, so what happened to these ambassadors from Asia Communista, who at this stage they don't know was Hawkmoon and Dwerk, who escaped to Yell, met up with Maigan of Hlandar and his magic rings, one of which they'd originally taken from Elvareza Tozer, the Grand Britannian mad poet, who rocked up at Castle Brass. Oh, it's all complicated stuff. Listen to the old podcasts. We're not going to recap it all for you. But they don't realise this yet. And King Huon's not too impressed with Meliadus. And Meliadus is getting like twitchy and annoyed. And he's not impressed. He doesn't like King Huon either. And yeah, he's a bit pissed off. But he threatens Meliadus with expulsion and being unmasked unless he sorts this stuff out. One thing to remember as well, of course, when our heroes went to Yell, is there was that passage in the Weird City, wasn't there, where Dwerk finds what we could read to be a bullet, which I think was described as a charge for an ancient weapon in the shape of a tiny cylinder.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, I got halfway through this book, and of course I have read this book before. I wonder if that'll ever come into play. Spoiler, it doesn't. We never see or hear from it again. Amazing. So, he knows that they've been spirited away by the magician Maigan of Hlandar. Meanwhile, Countess Flavia, widow of the evil Count Mikosafar and cousin to the king, is in her chambers pining over Dwerk. And there is a wonderful, wonderful paragraph. And it says, there's a wonderful passage, I should say. It says, Flana, Countess of Canbury, had a dozen husbands and more lovers, had disposed of them in one way or another as a woman might dispose of a useless pair of stockings. She had never known love, never had the feeling of emotion known to most others, even the rulers of Gran Bretagne. But somehow, Dwerk, that dandified renegade who claimed to be permanently ill, had aroused these feelings in her. Perhaps she had remained so remote heretofore because she was sane, while those surrounding her at court were not, because she was gentle and capable of selfless love, whereas the lords of the Dark Empire understood nothing of such feelings. Perhaps Dwerk, gentle, subtle, sensitive, had awakened her from an apathy induced not by a lack of soul, but by a greatness of soul, such greatness that it could not bear to exist in the mad, selfish, perverse world in the court of King Huon. But now that Countess Flavia was awake, she could not ignore the horror of her surroundings, the despair she felt that her lover of a single night might ever return, that he might even, already, be dead. She had taken to her apartments, avoiding contact with the rest, but while this ruse afforded her some surcease from understanding her circumstances, it only allowed her sorrow silence in which to grow. Tears fell down Flana's perfect cheeks, and she stopped their flow with a scented silken scarf. Oh, bless her. So we do have this one Grand Britannian noble who seems to have... Now, I'm thinking back to Sword of the Dawn, when she first encountered Dwerk, and he essentially... he took her fancy. But this is our first example of a Grand Britannian showing some level of emotional intelligence and reason. And it took our coughing friend, Willem Dwerk, dashing, entertaining geezer, to actually put some kind of sense of love in the heart of a Grand Britannian noble. I wonder how that'll pan out. Interesting. Yeah.
I'm sure there'll be plenty of coughing to go, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. And, you can't knock Dwerk anyway, can you? You just can't knock him. But I think we're on to chapter 3, so it's time for us to read. So I think we should read the first couple of pages of chapter 3 to set the scene. Because, of course, we always enjoy doing a reading, and I always enjoy hearing Dave's readings in his American brogue of the German Count of Cologne, Dorian Hawkmoon. Yeah. The great sails curved in the wind as the ship sped over the surface of the sea. The sky was clear and the sea was calm, a vast expanse of azure. Oars had been shipped, and the helmsman now looked to the main deck for his course. The boatswain, clad in orange and black, climbed to the deck where Hawkmoon stood staring across the ocean. Hawkmoon's golden hair streamed in the wind, and his cloak of wine-coloured velvet whipped out behind him. His handsome features were battle-hardened and weather-beaten, and were only marred by the existence, embedded in his forehead, of a dull black stone. Gravely, he acknowledged the boatswain's salute. "I've given orders to sail around the coast, heading due east, sir," the boatswain said.
"Who gave you that course, boatswain?"
Why, nobody, sir. I just assumed that since we were heading for Denark.
We are not heading for Denark. Tell the helmsman.
But that strange warrior, the warrior in jet and gold, you called him, he said...
He is not my master, bosun. No. We will sail out to sea now, for Europe.
For Europe, sir? You knew that after you saved Narleen we would take you anywhere, follow you anywhere. But have you any understanding of the distances we must sail to reach Europe? The seas we should have to cross? The storms?
Aye, I understand, but we still sail for Europe.
As you say, sir. Frowning, the boatswain turned away to give his orders to the helmsman. From his cabin below the main deck, De Verk now emerged and began to climb the ladder. Hawkmoon grinned at him.
Did you sleep well, friend De Verk?
As well as possible aboard this rocking tub. I am inclined to suffer from insomnia at the best of times, Hawkmoon, but I snatched a few moments. The best, I suppose I may expect.
When I looked in on you an hour ago, you were snoring.
Oh, so you heard me breathing heavily, eh? I tried to keep as quiet as possible, but this cold of mine, contracted since coming aboard, has given me a certain amount of difficulty. He raised a tiny square of linen to the tip of his nose. De Verk was dressed in silk, with a loose blue shirt, flowing scarlet breeks, a heavy broad leather belt supporting his sword, and a dirk. Around his bronze throat was wound a long scarf of purple, and his long hair was held back by a band that matched his breeks. His fine, almost ascetic features bore their usual sardonic expression. Did I hear aright below? Were you instructing the boatswain to head for Europe?
I was.
So you still intend to try to reach Castle Brass and forget what the warrior in jet and gold said of your destiny? That it was to take that blade there. Now De Verk pointed to the great red broadsword at Hawkmoon's side. To Denark, there to serve the Runestaff.
I owe allegiance to myself and my kin before I will serve an artifact in whose existence I gravely doubt.
You would not have believed before in the powers of that blade, the Sword of Dawn, yet you saw it summon warriors from thin air to save our lives. An obstinate look passed over Hawkmoon's features.
Aye, but I still intend to return to Castle Brass if that is possible.
There's no telling if it's in this dimension or another.
I know that also. I can only hope that it is in this.
Hawkmoon spoke with finality, showing his unwillingness to discuss the matter further. De Verk raised his eyebrows for a second time, then descended to the deck and strolled along it, whistling. Oh yeah, the back, baby. The back. Hawkmoon and De Verk. We'll talk a little bit more about that dynamic later on, I think, because I've got some thoughts about Hawkmoon as an aspect of the Eternal Champion, but also these books in general. But meanwhile, there's trouble ahead. A wall of weird colours that they consider for a while, then think, fuck it, let's sail on through it. And so they do, only to sail into monstrous trouble. Now, Mike's following his 60s 3-day book formula here.
Oh,
so
yeah.
after all, it's monster encounter time. It's like
Oh, yeah.
3 episodes, have something happen. 3 chapters, have something happen, or whatever it is. Anyway, it turns out these monsters, sea beasts that flap into the air, aren't interested in eating anybody, but instead they force the ship about and create a wind that blows the ship at breakneck pace for several hours until they wreck on an island. Because, of course, the bosun has just said, oh, God, it'll take weeks to get to Europe. So, of course, we need some monsters to turn up and hasten things, because this is only a 140-page book, so we can't have a 7-week journey back to Europe. They get some provisions from the wreckage, and with a surviving crew, climb to a peak on the barren island, where they meet a new character. Now, fair warning, in my head, this new character formed up as a British actor, the late, great Warren Clarke. And I don't know why this happened, but I was reading it, and right, okay, this guy, he shows up, he's got his dialogue, and in my head, I instantly started reading him as if he was being played by Warren Clarke. Now, Warren Clarke, been in lots and lots of things, died probably 10, 15 years ago. I think he'd been known to a lot of audiences for a detective show on British TV called DL and Pascoe. But his history goes way back. He was one of the original Droogs in Clockwork Orange.
Mm.
One of the two will become coppers, who later come across Alex. It is Alex, isn't it?
I think so.
Malcolm,
It's been a while.
Yeah. Then he ends up coming across them as 2 former gang members who turn out to be police further down the line, and they give him a good kicking. But yeah, and he was also in. He was part of Lindsay Anderson's acting troupe, so he played multiple parts in Oh Lucky Man, the Lindsay Anderson film, also starring Malcolm McDowell. But anyway, I'm banging on about Warren Clarke. He was also in an episode of the 3rd series of Blackadder as a mill owner, and he was absolutely brilliant, and he had an amazing comic sense of timing. as well. I think Blackadder's trying to marry his daughter, and at one point he says, "Oh, if I'll take my belt off and by thunder, my trousers will fall down." It's absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible scene. So, yes, they meet this new character. So once again, I think we should leap straight in, because why not? Let's just read a bit. Why the hell not? See if we get flagged up by an audiobook company on YouTube again.
Oh.
For providing competition.
Oh, shit.
All right, so let's go. They reached the summit at last and paused, breathing heavily from their exertions. "The other side's as barren as this," Dverk said, gesturing downwards. "I wonder." He broke off and gasped, "By the eyes of Berezanath, a man!" Hawkmoon looked to the direction Dverk indicated. Sure enough, a figure was strolling along the shore below. As they stared, he looked up and waved cheerfully, gesturing them towards him. Hardly sure if they were not suffering hallucinations, the two began to slowly climb down until they were close to the figure. He stood there, fists on his hips, feet wide apart, grinning at them. They paused. Maybe that's why I see him as Warren Clark, because that's the pose Warren Clark has when he says, "I'll take my belt off and by thunder, my trousers will fall down." Maybe that's why. But anyway. The man was dressed in a peculiar and archaic fashion. Over his brawny torso was stretched a jerkin of leather, leaving his arms and chest bare. He wore a woolen bonnet on his mop of red hair, and a pheasant's tail feather was stuck jauntily into it. His breeks were of a strange checkered design, and he wore battered, buckled boots on his feet. Secured over his back by a cord was a gigantic battle-axe, its steel blade streaked with dirt and battered by much use. His face was bony and red, and his pale blue eyes were sardonic as he stared at them. "Well now, you'd be the Hawkmoon and the Dverk," he said in a strange accent. "I was told you'd likely come." "And who are you, sir?" Dverk asked somewhat haughtily. "Why, I'm Olan Fank, didn't you know? Olan Fank here at your service, good sirs."
"Do you live on this island?"
"I've lived on it, but not at the moment, don't you know?" Fank removed his bonnet and wiped his forehead with his arm. "I'm a travelling man these days, like yourselves, I understand."
"And who told you of us?"
"I've a brother, given to wearing somewhat fancy metal, of black and gold."
"The warrior in jet and gold."
"Ah, he's called some foppish title, I gather. He would not have mentioned his rough and ready brother to you, I don't doubt."
"He did not. Who are you?"
"I'm called Olan Fank, from Skara Brae, in the Orkneys, you know."
"The Orkneys? Is that not part of Gran Breton, islands to the far north?"
"Ha ha ha ha! Tell an Orkney man that he belongs to the Dark Empire, and he'll tear the throat from you with his teeth. It's the favourite way of dealing with a foe out there, you know. We're not a sophisticated folk." "So the warrior in jet and gold is also from the Orkneys?" Dverk began. "Save you, no man. Him from the Orkneys, with his fancy suit of armour and his fine manner. Ha 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 ha! No, he's no Orkney man." Fank wiped tears of laughter from his eyes with his battered bonnet. "Why should you think that? You said he was your brother." "So he is, spiritually, you might say. Perhaps even physically. I've forgotten. It's been many years, you see, since we first came together." "What brought you together?" "A common cause, you might say. A shared ideal."
"And would the Runestaff be the source of that cause?"
"It might." "You seem close-mouthed suddenly, friend Fank," said Dverk. "Aye, in Orkney, we're a close-mouthed folk. Indeed, I'm considered something of a babbler there." Hawkmoon gestured behind him.
"Those monsters, the strange clouds we saw earlier, would that be to do with the Runestaff?"
"I saw no monsters, no clouds, but I've arrived here recently myself."
"We were driven to this island by gigantic reptiles, and now I begin to see why. They too serve the Runestaff, I do not doubt."
"That's as may be. It's not my business, you see, Lord Dorian."
"Was it the Runestaff that caused our boat to be wrecked?"
"I could not say. I only know that I'm here to give you a boat and tell you where you might find the nearest habitable land." "You have a boat for us?" Dverk was astonished. "Aye, not a splendid one, but a seaworthy craft nonetheless. It should take the two of you."
"The two of us? We have a crew of 50. Oh, if the Runestaff wishes me to serve it, it should arrange things better. All it has succeeded in doing so far is to anger me fiercely."
"Your anger will only weary you. I had thought you bound for Denark in the Runestaff service. My brother told me."
"Your brother insisted I go to Denark, but I have other loyalties, Orlan Fank. Loyalties to the wife I've not seen for months, to the father-in-law who waits my return, to my friends."
"The folk of Castle Brass? Aye, I've heard of them. They are safe, for the moment, if that comforts you."
"You know this for certain?"
"Aye, their lives are pretty much without event, save for the trouble with one Elvareza Tozer."
"Tozer? What of the renegade?"
"He secured back his ring, I gather, and left."
"For where?"
"Who knows? You have experience of the rings of Margan yourself."
"They are untrustworthy objects."
"So I understand."
They are well rid of Tozer at any rate."
I do not know the man.
A talented playwright with the moral rigor of a...
A Grand Britannian?
Exactly. You would not deceive me. My kin and friends are safe.
Their security for the moment is not threatened.
Where is this boat, and what of my crew?
I have some small skill as a shipwright. I'll help them mend the ship so that they can return to Narleen. Why can we not go with them? Dverk asked. I understood you were an impatient pair, that you would be off the island as soon as you could. It will take many days to repair the large craft.
We'll take your little boat. It seems that if we did not, the Runestaff, or whatever power it was that really sent us here, would see to it that we were further inconvenienced.
I understand that would be likely. And how would you leave the island if we take your boat? I'll sail with the seamen of Narleen. I have a great deal of time to spare.
How far is it to the mainland? And by what shall we sail? Have you a compass to lend us?
It's of no great distance, and you'll not need a compass. You need only wait for the right sort of wind.
What do you mean?
The winds in these parts are somewhat peculiar. You will understand what I mean. Hawkmoon shrugged in resignation. They followed as Orlan Fank read the way around the shore. It would seem that we are not quite as much the master of our destinies as we would like, murmured Dverk sardonically, as the small boat came into sight. Oh, Fank will be back, anyway. Mike loves to drop in a colourful ancillary character here and there to help our characters, our heroes, along the way. But Fank will be back, and there's a little bit more to him than meets the eye. And there's a wee bit of multiversal mystery about him as well, which is quite nice. Now, Hawkmoon ain't impressed. He thinks it's a shitboat. And straight away, he has a really, really good sulk about being blown by the winds of fate again and having no agency. But Dverk is having a great time, standing in the prow of this boat with the wind in his hair. And the boat is pretty swift too, because, of course, they've got to get places. And, this is... Funnily enough, one of the reasons I love this book so much that has only just really occurred to me. We have criticised some of these books in the past, haven't we, for kicking into quest mode with, like, a random artefact that they've got to find, and a third of the book is taken up by going to some funky place with a sighing bridge or a throbbing bridge or something or other, so they can find this thing that is guarded by mutant war jaguars of Asia Communista or whatever it is. But this is all killer no filler, really. I mean, they're travelling fast to get to where they need to be. They're meeting characters. But there is no quest mode component of this book.
No, I feel like Moorcock was like, all right, how do I get these people to actually get to the place we need them to be? Okay, giant sea serpents blowing their sails.
Yeah.
Fuck it. Let's go for it.
And it's cool. It's imagery driven. It's strong imagery. It's great. Now, I know we just did a big reading, but there's a bit here I can't resist.
Let's do it.
And it's the first page of chapter 30. Then we'll give readings a rest for a wee while. But let's just read the first page of chapter 30.
Chapter
5.
I'm like, hold on.
Yeah. Let's not skip to the end. Yeah, that would be the Battle of Londra, I think, if we just skip to the end. Fuck it, let's just get there. Chapter 5, A City of Glowing Shadows. I fucking love this. Hawkmoon lay scowling in the small boat, and Dverk whistled a tune as he stood in the prow, the spray lashing his face. For a whole day now, the wind had guided the craft, blowing them on what was plainly a peculiar course.
Now I understand what Frank meant about the wind. This is no natural breeze. I resent the feeling of being some supernatural agency's puppet.
Dverk grinned and pointed ahead. Well, perhaps we'll have a chance to voice our complaints to the agency itself. See? Land in sight. Hawkmoon rose reluctantly and saw the faint signs of land on the horizon. And so we return to Amarek, laughed Dverk.
If only it were Europe and Yselda were there.
Or even Londra and Flana to comfort me. Dverk shrugged. Still, it's best this way, lest she find herself pledged to a sick and dying creature. Gradually they could begin to make out features of the shoreline, of irregular cliffs, hills and beaches, and some trees. Then to the south they saw a peculiar aura of golden light that seemed to throb as if in rhythm with a gigantic heart. More disturbing phenomena, it seems. The wind blew harder and the little boat turned towards the golden light.
And we're heading directly for it. I'm becoming tired of such things.
Oh, I love it. The dynamic between these two, I think it's brilliant. Hawkmoon sulking because he's resisting the pull of destiny and fate and always being miserable. It's fucking brilliant. Although he does have a happy moment further on that we'll finish with. And then you've got Dverk with his pathetic coffin and his pathetic attempts to appear like a weakling, which, obviously has worked well for him. But it's such a great dynamic. Of all of Mike's characters and their companions, is this the greatest combination?
That's a tough one. It's hard to beat Elric and Moonglum. It's a similar dynamic. I think Elric is a bit more interesting, if not more complaining. Well, I don't know, though. Hawkmoon's really doing a lot of complaining and bitching this entire book so far. So, I don't know. He's reaching Elric levels at this point.
Other Eternal Champion characters are more interesting and have more depth than Hawkmoon. But the dynamic between the hero and the companion, I don't think is any better than the dynamic between Hawkmoon and Dverk, because it's perfectly balanced. Hawkmoon is a fucking grump. When we're introduced to him, basically he's got PTSD. He's being tortured. He's had an alien, like a vastly ancient, weird sorcery science thing put in his forehead. He's got fair reason to be a fucking grump and a misery. But the interplay between him and Dverk, I think, is fantastic. And just those moments like in Sword of the Dawn, where they've gone through a really hard time, and they just go to a chapeau shop and spend some time shopping, and Dverk is there going, oh yeah. I mean, Jerry O'Connell will always wear incredible threads, right? But you never hear Jerry in a shop getting off on buying incredible threads. So Dverk, is a painter, he's a sometime poet, he loves his posh threads, he loves his handkerchief. It's just a great combo. And much as I love the Elric Moonglum combo, I think it generally tends to revolve around Moonglum going, woohoo, we've got some treasure, let's go shagging. And Elric going, oh, I'm just going to give this giant jewel to this landlord so we can get a cup of wine. And Moonglum's like, no, we could have bought half a fucking country with that. And Elric's like, I don't care, I don't want half a country. And that is essentially their dynamic, right until Moonglum goes, friend Elric, aye. And Elric goes, oh no, friend Moonglum, blah. There's a little bit more, I think, a little bit more fun to the relationship between Hawkmoon and Dverk, which is such a wonderful contrast, Elric, the doomed lord, everything else, Moonglum, the thief, the swarthy thief. It's a good contrast. It's a good dynamic. Coram and Jari is a great relationship. It's a great pairing.
Yeah, that's a good dynamic.
But I don't know. There's just something about Hawkmoon and Dverk that just tickles me. I think it's fucking brilliant.
It's definitely a step up from Oladan, who was just kind of like, oh yeah, whatever you say, Master Hawkmoon, let's go.
Yeah, that's right. You do get the sense that in the Jewel in the Skull at the end when he introduces Oladan, he's like, yeah, Oladan, great companion. And at times in the other novels, when Jerry O'Connell, because he's like almost omniscient and has these memories of like Ericos does of being various versions of the champion, Jerry O'Connell will refer to oh yeah, I think I carried that name once. Or, he might, I think he meets Oladan at some point. He says, oh, friend Oladan, and he's saying that he was once Oladan and all that business. You never get that with Dverk. Dverk is never referred to in any other tracts of the Eternal Champion stories as a version of Jari. It's always Oladan. But Oladan basically vanishes in the middle two books. For the most part. He's in a little bit of the Mad God's Amulet, isn't he? And then he vanishes out into things. He only comes back halfway through this book. And you do get the sense that Moorcock wasn't, introduced him and created him, but then by the end, Moorcock's like, yeah, it's not very good, is he? And we'll find out at the end what that means for Oladan. No spoilers. No spoilers. Yeah. But they found themselves at the shore of a wonderful, vast, and hypnotically dreamlike city. Classic piece of Moorcock scene setting, empty of people, but with strange glowing shadows about, but it feels sort of warm and fleshy to the touch, which I think is a great image. It's like, oh, this place is weird, and it's glowing, and it's warm, it's vivid, it's like sort of dreamlike. Oh, wait, this wall feels like flesh. Yeah. And there's a big cylindrical building at the heart of that they decide to check out. And we're heading for something of a crunch, because the city is Dunark. So they've ended up in Dunark. They're greeted by a beautiful, glowing child, who introduces himself. Here we've got some more Moorcock intertextuality. Is this one a little bit on the nose, I wonder? Because the glowing child introduces himself as Jeremiah Cornelius. Yeah. And Dunark is indeed the city of the Runestaff, as trailed by the warrior and Jane Gold and Orland Fank. And we learn that the glowing shadows are the denizens that exist half in, half out of this plane, called the Great Good Ones. Yeah. Is that a great name? I don't know. It's it'll do. And after buttering them up and telling Dverk that he loves Dverk's paintings, which Dverk's, this is great, this guy knows who I am. Not only does he know who I am, he loves my paintings that I used to do before I became a mercenary for the Grand Britannians and did hideous evil things. Because what we're always forgetting when we're talking about Hawkmoon and Dverk as a pairing is Hawkmoon used to be a mercenary for Grand Britain for reasons, which, we could probably go into at some point, and I'm sure we have in the past. But Dverk, of course, was a mercenary for Grand Britain as well. So, they're both, in some ways, wrong uns, but at least it's paintings, and at least it's charming. So, but Jeremiah Cornelius, the child, tells them that another visitor arrived recently too, and he will introduce them. Well, it's only bloody Count of Sussex Shenagar Trott, innit? Brutal rapist, murderer of countless victims in Grand Britain's war on Europe. So, our heroes aren't too impressed. But this... oh, God. The child Cornelius, and how resonant is this, is in a bit of, well, this is neutral territory. We really should be civilised in our disagreements and be mannered in our interactions.
Uh-huh.
Oh, my God. How do we think this is going to work out?
I'm sure everybody will be on their best behavior, right?
Yeah.
That's what happens when you're nice to fascists. They're just going to be totally cool with you, right? That's always how it's been.
And of course, that's what Hawkmoon and Dverk say. They say to him, this guy is a rampaging fascist, murderer of women and children, rapist, brutalizer of many parts of Europe. He represents an evil regime. He's done terrible things. But Jeremiah Cornelius is like, oh yeah, but we've got to agree to disagree, haven't we? Let's just sit and have dinner. The Tower of the Runestaff is neutral territory. You can carry on your conflicts later on. Let's just chill out for now and let's just have a conversation. But there is a really cool passage that tells us more about Trott, and again, I think this is one of the reasons why, after reading this again, I'm like, okay, I remember now why I think we discussed this before. I remember thinking from reading this 30 years ago and then not reading it for fucking donkey's years. It's like, oh yeah, History of the Runestaff's great. Great start. Great ending. Sags a bit in the middle. Right. Now, of course, we reread Mad God's Amulet. Really enjoyed it. We reread Sword of the Dawn. And that was one that I thought for years was a weak one and I wasn't particularly looking forward to rereading it. We ended up really enjoying it because it kind of goes D&D for the second half with the Pirate Town and Narleen and all that stuff. All great. You could completely remove it from this series and lose nothing.
Basically.
Yeah.
Basically.
But good fun. But we're in proper business now. And we'll find out. So we've got Trott, this immensely fat but fearsome warrior who, unlike most of his fellow Grand Britannian dignitaries and warlords, wears a plain silver mask that is seemingly a duplicate of his own features. There's a little bit different about him. And Dverk and Hawkmoon waste no time whatsoever giving him some grief and challenging him over his presence. And he has this bit of dialogue where he says, you forget that we are scientists and scholars too in Grand Britain, Trott said, as if mildly offended. We seek knowledge and truth and reason. Why our whole intention in uniting the warring states of Europe was to bring a rational peace to the world, so that knowledge might progress the faster. Dverk coughed theatrically, but said nothing. Trott now did something that in a Dark Empire noble was virtually unprecedented, for he cheerfully pushed back his mask and began to eat. In Grand Britannia it was considered gross indecency both to display the face and to eat in public. Trott, Hawkmoon knew, had always been thought eccentric in Grand Britain, tolerated by the other nobles only by virtue of his vast private fortune, his skill as a general, and, in spite of his flabby appearance, a warrior of considerable personal courage. The face revealed was plainly the one caricatured on the mask. It was white, plump, and intelligent. The eyes were without expression, but it was plain Shenagar Trott could put whatever expression he chose onto them. They ate in relative silence. Only the boy touched some of the food, though he sat with them. At length, Hawkmoon gestured to the Count's bulky silver armour.
Why do you travel in such heavy accoutrement, Count Shenagar, if you are on a peaceful mission of exploration?
Why, How was I to anticipate what dangers I should have to face in this strange city? Surely it is logical to travel well prepared. Dverk changed the subject as if he realised they would receive nothing but smooth answers from the Grand Britannian. How goes the war in Europe? He asked. There is no war in Europe, Trot answered.
No war? Then why should we be here, exiled from our own lands?
There is no war because all of Europe is now at peace under the patronage of our good King Huon, Shenegar, Trot said, and then he gave a faint wink, almost a comradely wink, which made it impossible for Hawkmoon to reply. Save for the Camargue, that is. And that, of course, has vanished altogether. My fellow peer, Baron Meliadus, was quite enraged by that.
I'm sure he was. And does he still continue his vendetta against us?
Indeed he does. In fact, when I left Londra, he was in danger of becoming a laughingstock at court. You seem to feel little affection for Baron Meliadus, Dverk suggested. You understand me well, Count Shenegar told him. You see, we are not all such insane and greedy men as you would think. I have many disputes with Baron Meliadus. Though I am loyal to my motherland and my leader, I do not agree with everything done in their names. Indeed, what I myself have done. I follow my orders. I am a patriot. I would prefer to stay at home reading and writing. I was once thought a promising poet, you know.
But now you only write epitaphs, and those in blood and fire.
You have your point of view. I have mine. I believe in the ultimate sanity of our cause, that the unification of the world is of maximum importance, that personal ambitions, no matter how noble, must be sacrificed to the larger principles.
That is the usual bland Grand Britannian answer. It is the argument that Meliadus used to Count Brash shortly before he attempted to rape and carry off his daughter Yzelda.
I have already disassociated myself from Baron Meliadus. Every court must have its fool. Every great ideal must attract some who are motivated only by self-interest. A nice bit of development of an interesting Grand Britannian character.
Yeah.
I mean, I think these characterizations are another great example of the qualities of the Runestaff series. And I thought that when I was reading it. But now I'm reading it back again, it's like, oh my God, that stuff about you have your position,
Yep.
I have mine. It's like, holy shit, man.
Sounds like Christmas dinner with Trump supporters, man. That's just like how all these conversations go. Well, I think it doesn't matter all the horrible things they're doing. You know, the ultimate thing is to make America great again. You know, that kind of, oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah, this was a great, well-written passage. It definitely triggered me to use a word right there. I was like, God damn it. It's the same shit.
So much for the tolerant left, Dave. So much for the tolerant left.
Yeah, so much for that. No, it's exactly that exact same kind of energy. And it's so, I mean, it's so funny. Obviously, this was written in the 60s. You know, Jesus Christ. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? I'm just going to take a moment to... I've finished my Black Sheep Snowflake beer, which I was drinking earlier on. I know it's early in the day for you, so you're probably drinking a nice cup of tea.
I have a lovely cup of chai right here, and that's my go-to.
Yeah.
Nice
Well, it's Sunday evening over here, and I thought, right, what have I got to drink? Well, it turns out that when Loz was here for episode 101 at Christmas, I got 2 beer Christmas crackers.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I forgot about them, so we didn't open them. So I'm going to open one now. And so I've opened up to a Vocation Brewery Life and Death Classic IPA. And just to save time later, what's the other one? Let's find out what the other one is. The other one is a Crush Hour Everyday Hazy Pale. Fair enough. So they will do for me. That will get me through the evening, I think. So, yeah, these books, yes, they're going to quest mode regularly. Sometimes they get lost in the weird idea-strewn adventure setting of the moment, like in The Sword of the Dawn last time. But these moments when we found out more about the nature of the enemy and the range of quite textured personalities amongst the Grand Britannian villains elevate them in some ways to the broader Eternal Champion mythos and make them stronger. Because despite all the throbbing bridges and mutant war jaguars of Asia Communista, these books are more grounded in terms of the villainy. And when you read these passages of dialogue, even more fucking grounded and real. And Trot's putting on this good show of being a reasonable and rational man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even though our heroes are not buying it. But Jeremiah Cornelius is, it appears. The guy who, in some ways, could be the supreme power of the land, the representative of the Runestaff on Earth. He's like, oh, yeah, we really should talk and enter into some dialogue with these people. It's like, oh my God. So it's pointed out that there's no longer any war in Europe. The continent's now under the rule of King Huon. All the previously squabbling and warring city-states are now united under Huon's peace. So once again, I think we'll discuss this before as well. In this whole thing in the Moorcock books about law versus chaos and all this stuff, Grand Britannians you can view as the epitome of a most evil manifestation of the forces of law, because they viewed Europe as chaotic and they wanted to bring it under the yoke of their king. They're just doing it in a sick and perverse manner, and the people who enact it all are all essentially insane. And again, it's just good stuff, and I think it elevates the history of the Runestaff series to something a little bit more unique. Because, you've got the Coram series, you've got vicious villains, human villains, Mabden villains in the Coram series, but there's no depth to the head of the pony tribes in the Coram books. And whilst the Knight of the Swords, the King of the Swords, the Queen of the Swords are interesting demonic villains, they don't have any root in any of the stuff that we're seeing with these villains. It's good stuff. They're just fucking dirty rotters, aren't they? Just like these fuckers who are anti-immigrant and anti-everything else. They're just dirty fucking greedy rotters who want to impose their sense of order on things and fuck everybody else. But
oh yeah, I don't agree with that. I'm just following orders. Anyway, sorry. We'll get back to it. I'll go and rant all goddamn day.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll get back to it again. But the child acknowledges that Trott wants to see the Runestaff, and he offers them all that right because, everybody's got the right to see the Runestaff. But Trott wants to sleep on it back aboard his ship. It's like, oh no, my men might miss me. He's like, oh yeah, I've only got 50 men with me. Well, at one point I think Derek says, why would you come here with only 50 men? And that's the point where he says, well, we're not all vicious warriors. Some of us are scientists and scholars. Anyway, Hawkmoon and Derek awake the following day to find themselves whisked into the air by agitated great good ones, these glowing shadows. And unfortunately for them, they're deposited amongst 1,000 Falcon Legion troops that Shenagar Trott has led into the city and to the cylindrical tower. And he's taken the child Jeremiah Cornelius hostage and has threatened to slit his throat should the Glowing Shadows or Hawkmoon and Derek intervene. And the Glowing Shadows are super agitated. Shenagar Trott is licking his lips with delight at the fact that his ploy actually worked, and this child, this agent of the Runestaff, was so gullible, and he thinks he's in a position of power. So yes, how did that neutrality and civilized position suit you now, Jeremiah Cornelius, representative of the Runestaff? And he does say to Hawkmoon, he says, I fear I should have paid more attention to you, sir. He's like, yeah, no shit. We all saw this coming. We saw it coming from a fucking mile away. Trott demands the child take him to the chamber of the Runestaff. The child, with little other choice, really, given his circumstances, agrees, and now, faced with 1,000 Falcon warriors, Falcons being mercenaries, like the Vulture Legion, the Falcon Legion, Trott's favourite legion, they wonder how they're going to get out of this one. How are they going to get out of this one, Dave? They're faced with 1,000 Falcon Legion warriors. What the fuck is going to happen next?
Well, I think there is that nice Sword of the Dawn. Yeah.
Of course. Magic and/or weird science. We'll get through. We'll get through that. So the great good ones scoop them up, spirit them away, not away exactly where they need to be, in the tower, to the chamber of the Runestaff. And we have a short chapter, chapter 9, where we find out what the hell is going on. So let's give it a read. Chapter 9. As the golden mist diminished, Hawkmoon blinked his eyes, for they were now assailed by all manner of colours, waves and rays making strange configurations in the air, and all emanating from a central source. Narrowing his eyes against the light, he peered around him. They hovered near the roof of a hall whose walls seemed constructed of sheets of translucent emerald and onyx. At the centre of a hall rose a dais, reached by steps from all sides. It was from the object on this dais that the configuration of light originated. The patterns, stars, circles, cones, and more complex figures, shifted constantly, but their source was always the same. It was a small staff about the length of a short sword, of a dense black, dull, and apparently discoloured in a few places. The discolorations were of a deep mottled blue. Could this be the Runestaff, Hawkmoon wondered. It seemed unimpressive for an object of such legendary powers. He'd imagined it taller than a man, of brilliant colours, but that thing he could carry in one hand. Can you imagine Hawkmoon's living room? I bet he's got zero fucking taste. I bet everything is massive and loud and garish. Yeah. Could this be the roost? Anyway, suddenly from the side of the hall, men thrust themselves in. It was Shenagar Trot and his Falcon Legion. The little boy still struggled in Trot's grasp, and now the laughter of the Count of Sussex began to fill the hall. At last, it's mine! Even the Emperor will not dare to deny me anything once the Runestaff itself is in my hands. Hawkmoon sniffed. There was a fragrant, bittersweet smell in the air, and now a mellow humming sound began to fill the hall. The great good ones began to lower himself, and de Verk, until they stood high on the steps just below the Runestaff, and then Count Shenagar saw them. How? Hawkmoon glared down at him, raised his left arm to point directly at him.
Release the child, Shenagar Trot.
The Count of Sussex chuckled again, recovering quickly from his astonishment. First, tell me how you arrived here before me.
By means of the help of the great good ones, those supernatural creatures you feared, and we have other friends, Count Shenagar.
Trot's dirk leapt to within a hair's breadth of the boy's nose. I would be a fool, then, to release my only chance of freedom, not to say success. Hawkmoon lifted up the sword of the dawn.
I warn you, Count, this blade I bear is no ordinary instrument. See how it glows with rosy light.
Aye, it is very pretty, but can it stop me before I pluck one of the boy's eyes from his skull, like a plum from a jar? De Verk glanced about the strange room, at the constantly changing patterns of light, at the peculiar walls and the glowing shadows now high above which seemed to be looking on. It seems to be stalemate, Hawkmoon, he murmured. We can get no further help from the glowing shadows by the look of it. Evidently they are powerless to take a part in human affairs.
If you'd release the boy, I'd consider letting you leave Denark unharmed.
Indeed! And you would chase an army from the city? You too?
We are not without allies.
Possibly, but I suggest you lay down your own swords and let me up to the Runestaff there. When I have that, you may have the boy.
Alive?
Alive? How can we trust Shenagar Trot of all men? De Verk said. He will kill the boy and then dispose of us. It is not the way of nobles of Gran Bretanne to keep their word.
If only we had some guarantee.
At that moment, a familiar voice spoke from behind them, and they turned in surprise. You have no choice but to release the child, Shenagar Trot. Oh no, sorry, wrong accent. You have no choice but to release the child, Shenagar Trot. The voice boomed from within a helm of jet and gold. Aye, my brother speaks the truth. From the other side of the dais, Orlan Fank now emerged, his gigantic war axe on his leather-clad shoulder.
How did you get here?
I might ask the same. At least you now are friends with whom to debate this dilemma. Ah, so we have a team. We have a team of 4. So, fight on. Trot thinks he still has the upper hand, what with it being 1,000 to 4 in his odds. But the child slips his grasp as if a ray of light emerges and merges with the Runestaff as Orlan Fank explains something about the nature of the boy. Now the boy, or whatever it was stretching out over their heads to touch the Runestaff. The configurations changed rapidly, and many more of them now filled the hall, so that all their faces were crossed with shifting bars. Orlan Fank watched this with great attention. It seemed that as the boy was actually absorbed into the Runestaff, the Orkneyman's face saddened, as if in regret. Soon there was no trace of the boy in the hall, and the Runestaff now glowed a brighter black, seemed to have assumed sentience.
Who was he, Orlan Fank?
Who? Why, the spirit of the Runestaff. He rarely materialises in human form. You were especially honoured. Shenagar Trot was screaming in fury, but then broke off as a great voice boomed from behind the closed helm of the warrior in jet and gold. Now you must prepare yourself for death, Counts of Sussex. You are still mistaken. There are 4 of you, 1,000 of us. You shall die, and then I shall claim the Runestaff. The warrior turned to Hawkmoon. Duke of Colne, would you care to summon some aid?
With pleasure. I summon the Legion of the Dawn!
The Legion of the Dawn are summoned. Odds evened. Well, we would hope so. But Hawkmoon soon learns a critical lesson about the power of the sword. As he observes that the Falcon troops are dismayed to find that for every member of the Legion of the Dawn that falls, another materialises to take his place, he takes a blow to the noggin, and his consciousness fades, and as it does, so does the Legion, much to the delight of Trot and his mercenaries. And, unfortunately, the cost is rather dear. So, Chapter 11, A Brother Slain. Bit of a spoiler there. Bit of a spoiler. This whole fucking podcast is a spoiler, isn't it?
That's the whole
People, if
point.
you listen to this podcast, we are spoiling the books for you. Yeah. I'm guessing if people listen to the podcast by now, they know that, so it's probably not a problem. Hawkmoon heard the distant din of battle, shook his head and peered through a haze of red and black. He tried to rise, but realised that at least 4 corpses pinned him down. His friends had taken good account of themselves. Struggling up, he saw that Shenagar Trot had reached the Runestaff, and there stood the warrior in jet and gold, evidently badly wounded, hacked at by 100 blades, attempting to stop the Grand Britannian from reaching the Runestaff. But Shenagar Trot raised a huge mace and brought it down on the warrior's helm. He staggered, and the helm crumpled. Hawkmoon gathered his breath to cry hoarsely,
Legion of the Dawn! Return to me, Legion of the Dawn!
And then the barbaric warriors began to reappear, lashing about them at the startled falcons. Hawkmoon began to stagger up the steps to the warrior's aid, unable to see if any of the others lived, but then the huge weight of the jet and gold armour began to fall towards him, knocking him backwards. He supported it as best he could, but he knew by the feel of it that there was no life left in the body within. He forced back the visor, weeping for the man he had never considered a friend until now, curious to see the features of the one who had guided his destiny for so long, but the visor would hardly move an inch, for Shenagar Trot's mace had buckled it.
Warrior.
The warrior is dead. Shenagar Trot had flung off his mask and was reaching for the runestaff triumphantly, staring back over his shoulder at Hawkmoon. As shall you be in a trice, Dorian Hawkmoon. With a shout of fury, Hawkmoon dropped the warrior's corpse and flew up the steps towards his enemy. Disconcerted, Trot turned, raised the mace again. Hawkmoon ducked the blow and closed with Trot, grappling with him on the topmost step while red carnage spread all around them. As he struggled with the count, he saw Deverk, halfway up the steps, his shirt a mass of bloody rags, one arm limp at his side, tackling 5 of the Falcon warriors. And higher up, Orlan Fank was still alive, wailing his battle-axe around his head and giving voice to a strange, scaling cry. Trot's breath wheezed from beneath his fat lips, and Hawkmoon was astonished at his strength. You will die, Hawkmoon. You must die if the runestaff is to be mine.
It will never be yours. It can be possessed by no man.
With a sudden heave, he broke Trot's guard and punched him full in the face. Yes! The Count screamed and came forward again, but Hawkmoon raised his booted foot and kicked him in the chest, sending him reeling back against the dais. Then Hawkmoon recovered his sword, and when Shenagar Trot ran at him again, blind with anger, he ran directly onto the point of the Sword of the Dawn, dying with an obscene curse on his lips and one last backward look at the runestaff. Hawkmoon took the sword free and looked about him. His Legion of the Dawn were finishing their work, clubbing down the last of the falcons, and Deverk and Fank were leaning exhaustedly against the dais beneath the runestaff. Soon a few groans were cut short as spiked clubs fell on heads, and then there was silence, save for the faint melodic humming and the heavy breathing of the 3 survivors. As the last Grand Britannian died, the Legion of the Dawn vanished. Oh, that's good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. After all that frustration at Shenagar Trot at dinner, that scene, oh, that's good stuff. I mean, you know, it's terrible that the warrior in jet and gold gets done. But that scene where he's having the fight and he just punches him in the face. Chef's kiss. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's great stuff. And you can always rely on Moorcock to punctuate everything with a nice bit of action. And that's a great example. But again, Shenagar Trot, great villain.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely loathsome.
Terrific. And to get that cathartic release of Hawkmoon besting him, not besting him in a sword fight, well, besting him in a fight, but that bit where he's just like, you know, breaks his guard, then punches him in the face. It's like, oh, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. But of course, we've read this book before. We know fully well there's more tragedy to come before the Emperor of Grand Britannia is vanquished. The child now, having emerged briefly to give Hawkmoon his blessing to carry the runestaff as its chosen representative and use its power to unite Europe against King Huon, is fully absorbed into the staff, and Orlan Fank is sorrowful. Hawkmoon mutely accepted the staff. It felt cold, dead, and very heavy, though the patterns still blazed about it. Put it inside your shirt or wrap it in a cloth, advised the boy, and none will observe those betraying forces that surround the runestaff until you should wish them revealed.
Thank you.
The great good ones will help you return to your home. Farewell, Hawkmoon.
Farewell. Where do you go now?
Where I belong. And suddenly the boy began to change again, turning into a streamer of golden light that still had some semblance of human shape, pouring itself into the runestaff that immediately became warm, vital, and light in Hawkmoon's grasp. With a slight shudder, Hawkmoon took the runestaff inside his shirt. As they walked out of the hall, de Werk observed that Orlan Fank was still weeping softly. "What disturbs you, Fank?" de Werk asked. "Do you still grieve the man who was your brother?" "Aye, but I grieve my son the more." "Your son? What of him?" Orlan Fank jerked his thumb at Hawkmoon, who wandered behind, his head bowed in thought. "He has him." "What do you mean?" Fank sighed. "It must be, I know that, but still, I am a man. I can weep. I speak of Jeremiah Cornelius." "The boy? The spirit of the Runestaff?" "Aye, he was my son. Or myself. I've never quite understood these things."
Well, all right.
Well, fuck, if you don't know Fank, old chap, we ain't got a fucking clue, have we? We ain't got a clue. End of book 1, with some multiversal mystery of the nature of Fank and Jeremiah Cornelius and everything else, but end of book 1. Now, in the past, of course, we may have stopped there. We discussed this, Dave. We can't continue to make 3 podcasts out of 140-page short novels. So we carried on into book 2. And we talked about the texture of Gran Britannia's villains having more flavour and texture than any of the antagonists in any of the Moorcock books of this era.
Definitely.
Which we can call the first age of Mike. But what we get now is basically 5 chapters of scheming by Meliadus that ultimately reveal his grand plot to usurp the throne and place Flana Mikosovar, Countess of Canbury, on the throne, the cousin of King Huon. And he's manoeuvring with Caelan, he's manoeuvring with Tarragorm, the depictions of the city and the garish colours and the hideous flavours of it all. Classic early Moorcock, concise, economical, but driving and dripping with texture. Fabulous stuff. We were also saying earlier that the first part of this book drags the narrative back to the core of the story and cuts down the extraneous stuff. Well, it's even more concentrated here. It does make me think again. Hawkmoon, on his own, pretty bland, uninspiring. You could say the same of Ericos, I suppose. You know, Ericos swinging wildly in one book from being the brutal tool of a xenophobic and murderous human race to the saviour of his enemy because of the love of an elderly woman. It's a wee bit shallow, Ericos' arc in The Eternal Champion. But as we found out when we read it for the podcast, it's still a good read, and as part of the overall tapestry, it's great. We mentioned earlier Hawkmoon first book, PTSD-riddled mess, thanks to his pre-Duel Skull history of losing his city, his family, and then doing terrible things on behalf of a xenophobic evil nation, the same one that butchered his family, but as a long con to get revenge. But even that failed miserably and led to the deaths of all his men and extensive torture. But once again, the love of the woman, and I think looking at some flowers in a garden at Castle Brass gets him through his pain and torture and he becomes a hero one way or the other. Both bland as fuck. The only emotion is woe is me, I refuse to be the tool of fate, stroke the Runestaff, stroke the balance, stroke, etc. Except he has that great contrasting companion in de Werk. But the stories, to really compound how good this is, have the Gran Britannian angle. Why do the Gran Britannians work as such good villains?
I think because they, more than any of the other villains in any of the other series, they actually, I mean, they do have historical parallels. They're an actual threat. I mean, they actually rule the world. I mean, you get that a little bit, especially I think in the second Coram trilogy, where the villains are ruling the world and stuff like that. But those villains are mostly undead, frozen zombie things. Not that compelling. These villains are scheming. They're weird. They're deranged. They're depraved. They're just, you know, they have weird shows with animals and in their parties. And we went into that in a previous episode. So if you're unfamiliar with the hell we're talking about, well, you know, certain things are implied. And, you know, so they're just totally despicable and relatable in a sense that, I mean, especially as we saw in the conversation in a few chapters ago with Shinagar Trot, they're disturbingly relatable to current events and past events in history.
Yeah, it's close to home, isn't it? And of course, as you said, these are paralleling things that were only happening 24 years before these books were written. So they had real world analogues, and that just makes them more interesting. But it's like that whole thing about, I mean, I think you see it in any good quality, interesting movie about World War II. Like if there's a film called, I think it's called Conspiracy, about the Wannsee Conference, and it's got Stanley Tucci and Kenneth Branagh and various other really, really good quality actors playing the people who sit around a table and as grey, bland administrators plot the death of millions of people as an administrative problem. And you have other ones, films about the German army or the German activity where you're encouraged to some degree to relate to how charming and reasonable some of these characters sounded. And this is what he's doing really, really successfully here. Meliadus is an absolute cock, right? But there's a tiny part here at times where you think he'd probably be quite good fun at a party, you know? Obviously, when you see everything in the broader context, the bit with the dinner with Shenagar Trott, it absolutely reinforces the fact that you could sit with that guy and if you weren't on your toes, think, you know, this guy
he's quite reasonable.
Talks reasonably.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, he doesn't actually like doing these horrible things. He's just following orders and, okay, he's not as big a monster as I thought because he says that he isn't. And I take it at face value because I'm a moron.
Yeah. So some of the stuff that you mentioned about the perversions of the Grand Britannians. The next 5 chapters are split. There's basically 5 chapters. The first one is Meliadus doing his business. The first one is he visits Flana and encourages her to join his plot to usurp Huon and explains to her why she's the perfect person to become his replacement. Then there's a meeting with Kaelin, and Kaelin has to put him in the fleshy bell, the mind machine, because King Huon is suspicious of Meliadus' intentions, but he's kind of got Kaelin on board with his scheme. Then he visits Tarragorm. Tarragorm's on board because they've got a certain bond, which he explains to Flana why they've got that bond. I'll read that in a second. Then he goes to see Huon, and Huon thinks he's got the upper hand over Meliadus because he says Trott is a week late coming back, so I'm sending you on the mission, the follow-up mission to Amarek, and thinks he's going to get Meliadus out of his hair. And then chapter 5 is Meliadus unveiling the plan to all of his most loyal captains in the port of Dover and getting them to buy into the plot as well. But there's this section with Flana, and I mean, you've got this brilliant section where they describe sailing up the blood-red River Tame that made its sluggish way through the very heart of London between gloomy, crazy towers. Above them, the occasional ornithopter, a bright bird of metal, clanked past, and on the river, the barges of bronze and ebony carried cargo to and from the coast. Those cargoes were rich, full of stolen goods and stolen women, men, children, brought as slaves to Londra. An awning of heavy purple velvet hung with tassels of scarlet silk protected the occupants of the veranda from view above, and the awning's shadow made it impossible for them to be seen from the river. A table of brass and 2 golden chairs upholstered in blue plush stood on the veranda. A richly decorated platinum tray on the table bore a wine jug of dark green glass and 2 matching goblets. On either side of the door leading to the veranda stood a naked girl with face, breasts, and genitals heavily rouged. Anyone familiar with the court of Londra would have recognised the slave girls as belonging to Baron Meliadus of Croydon, for he had only female slaves, and their only livery was the rouge he insisted they wear. One of the girls who stared fixatedly out of the river was a blonde, almost certainly from Cologne in Germany, which was one of the Baron's possessions by right of conquest. The other girl was dark, doubtless from some town in the Middle East that Baron Meliadus had added, by means of a blooded sword, to his estates. In one of the golden chairs sat a woman clad from head to foot in rich brocade and wearing a silver mask, delicately fashioned to resemble a heron. And of course, this is Flana. And they're sitting there, they're having a drink, through their drinking straws into their masks, and he's trying to tempt her into engaging with him in conversation, engaging in his plot. And at one point she says to him, "Cannot one tire of rape and murder, of torture and destruction?" He finds this absolutely puzzling. But then he explains why she is the perfect person to actually sit atop the throne. She says, "Therefore I suppose I can agree to your plans, Meliadus, for what you suggest I do is doubtless no more boring than anything else. Very well, I'll be your queen when you need me, and if Huon discovers our perfidy, why, it will be a relief to die." Slightly unnerved by this, Meliadus rose from the table. "You will say nothing to anyone unless the time comes, Flana?" "I will say nothing." "Good. Now I must visit Kaelin. He is attracted to my scheme, since it means more scope for his experiments if we succeed. Tarragorm, too, is with me." "You trust Tarragorm? Your rivalry is well known." Aye, I hate Tarragorm, it is true, and he hates me. It's a mellow sort of hatred now, for you remember that our rivalry began over Tarragorm's marriage to my sister, whom I had previously intended to wed myself. But my sister compromised herself, with a jackass, I heard, and Tarragorm discovered it. Whereupon, as you no doubt heard, my sister had a slave slaughter her and the ass in some strange manner. Tarragorm and I disposed of the slaves jointly, and during that episode we rediscovered something of our old comradeship. My brother-in-law may be trusted. He feels Huon hampers his researches too much. Oh, these are wrong-uns, aren't they? these are absolute wrong-uns.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. Next, he moves on to Caelan, and he goes in the mentality machine. Caelan agrees that even though he draws information from Meliadus' mind, he will tailor it to the king. So all it shows is his hatred of Hawkmoon and his love for the king. And it will override anything in terms of his schemes for ousting Huon from power. And then he goes to see Tarragorm. And in Tarragorm's strange palace, shaped like a gigantic clock, the air was full of clanks and whirs and the whistling of pendula and balance wheels. And Tarragorm, in his huge clock mask that told the time as accurately as the other clocks in the palace, took Meliadus' arm and guided him through the hall of the pendulum, where a short distance above Meliadus' head, the huge brass bob, made to resemble an ornate blazing sun, flung its 50-ton weight back and forth across the hall. "Well, brother," Meliadus shouted above the noise, "you sent me a message that you said I would be pleased to hear, but the message only told me to come to see you." "Aye, I felt it best to tell you to come in private. Come." Tarragorm led Meliadus through a short passage and into a small room in which stood only one ancient clock. Tarragorm closed the door and there was relative silence. He indicated the clock. "It's probably the oldest clock in the world, brother. A grandfather, it was called, and it was made by Thomas Tompion." "I have not heard the name." "A master craftsman, the greatest of his age. He lived well before the onset of the tragic millennium." "Indeed, and has this something to do with your message?" "Of course not." Tarragorm clapped his hands and a side door opened. A lean, ragged figure stepped through, his face covered by a cracked, plain leather mask. He bowed extravagantly to Meliadus. "Who is this?" "It is Elvareza Tova, brother. You remember the name?" "Of course, the man who stole Mygon's rings and then vanished." "So they've got Toza, and Toza knows the secret of the machine from Soriandum that is keeping Castle Brass hidden." "Oh, right, so they've got a handle on Castle Brass too now. Crikey." And then he goes to see King Huon. King Huon thinks he's got the handle on him, and he's wrong. He says Meliadus was astonished to discover that Trott had sailed to Amarek, and it made him even more resentful, for it meant that Huon had entrusted the Count of Sussex with an assignment that was rightfully his. Another score to settle, he told himself. He was glad now that he had bided his time and accepted, or appeared to have accepted, the king's orders. His opportunity, in fact, seemed to have been handed to him by the creature he now considered to be his arch-enemy after Hawkmoon. So he gets the agreement to take the vultures on his trip to Amarek, in inverted commas. But of course, he's got his plot. His plot really is to take his ships from Dover and get all of his captains together and stand and tell them that they are going to take the capital from King Huon. They're going to sail around the coast, up the Thames, and essentially take down all of the loyal legions. Now, I'm reading all this, and I think we said before that Warhammer 40,000 took shitloads from Moorcock, particularly from the history of the Runestaff, with the immortal, long-dead king, emperor in Warhammer 40,000, in his throne that keeps him alive. And you've also got that thing in Warhammer 40,000, the Horus Heresy. Mm-hmm. It's basically this, expanded onto a galactic scale.
Yeah.
It's and reading it again, it's like, oh yeah. And there's these scenes where he's telling his captains and he's getting them on board. It's like, I read some of the Horus Heresy books, and if you took this one chapter and blew it up to 5 really boring novels, that actually explains a big chunk of the Black Library Horus Heresy series. Yeah, but it is good stuff, and we also get our mentions, don't we, of the terrifying ancient gods of Gran Bretagne.
Oh yeah,
Jean, Jorg, Fowl, and Runga, who were said to have ruled the land before the tragic millennium. Churchill, the howling god. Birin Adas, the singing god. Gigiblad, the groaning god, Jim Slas, the weeping god, and Arel Vilson, the roaring god, supreme god, father of Skvis, and Blan Sacredid, the gods of doom and chaos. And the Arel Vilson is the flagship. So it is dating itself a little bit. I suppose,
just a touch, probably. Yeah.
Well,
I know maybe about half of them.
Yeah. Obviously, there's Brian Aldis, the singing god. Gigi Blad.
J.G. Ballard.
Everything. J.G. Ballard. Jim Slas. J.H. apostrophe I.M. Slas. Harold Wilson, the Prime Minister of the time, of course. Father of Skvis and Blan Sacredid, the gods of doom and chaos.
Now those are total head scratchers to me. I'm
Mm.
hoping you might have some ideas.
Well, you know what? All I'm going to say is listeners, answers on a postcard, stroke, messages, and give us...
There we go.
Because I'm sure I could have Googled this. There will be people out there who've written on internet blogs and various other places who these references actually refer to. But yeah, I was just reading this afternoon. I couldn't be bothered. I was like doing my re-revision this afternoon with a cup of tea. And someone will tell us. But the Arel Vilson is the flagship, and on the flagship's bridge stood the brooding figure of Baron Meliadus, beside him Countess Flena Mikozovar. Below the bridge, the captains of the ships in wolf and vulture masks were beginning to assemble, having been summoned to the flagship by Meliadus. They looked up expectantly as Meliadus cleared his throat. You are doubtless wondering about our destination, gentlemen, and wondering too about the nature of these strange ships we sail in. The ships are no mystery. They are equipped with engines similar to those which power our ornithopters, but much more powerful. And the invention of that genius of Gran Britain, Baron Caelan of Vital. They can bear us swifter than sail across continents of water and do not need to wait on the will of the elements. As to our destination, that I will reveal in private. This ship is the Arel Vilson, named after the supreme god of ancient Gran Britain, who made this nation what she is today. Her sister ships are the Skvis and the Blan Sacredid, which are the old words for doom and for chaos. But they are also the sons of Arel Vilson, and represent the glory of Gran Britain, the old dark glory, the gloomy glory, the bloody and terrible glory of our land, a glory of which I am sure you are all rightly proud. Would you see it lost, gentlemen? The answer roared back, No, no, by Arel Vilson, by Skvis and Blan Sacredid, no, no. And would you do anything to make sure that Gran Britain retained her black might and her lunatic glory? Aye, aye, aye. And would you all unite with me in an insane adventure such as those embarked upon by Arel Vilson and his peers? Aye, tell us what it is. You would not shrink from it? You would follow it through to the end? Aye, shouted more than a score of voices. Then follow me to my cabin and I will detail the plan. But be warned, once you have entered that cabin, you have to follow me forever. Any who holds back will not leave the cabin alive. So he stands before them and he tells them, well, we're embarking upon treason. We are about to rebel against our hereditary ruler, Huon, the King Emperor. There were many gasps from around the table as the wolf and vulture masks stared intently at Baron Meliadus. King Huon is insane, Meliadus told them quickly. It's not personal ambition that drives me to this scheme, but a love for our nation. Huon is mad. His 2,000 years of life has clouded his brain rather than give him wisdom. He is trying to make us expand too rapidly. This expedition was to go to Amarek to see if the land could be conquered. Well, we have barely crushed the whole Middle East, and there are still parts of Muscovia that are not entirely ours. And you would rule in Huon's place, eh, Baron? The vulture captain suggested cynically. Meliadus shook his head. Not at all. Flana Mikozovar would be your queen. Vulture and Wolf would take the place of the Mantis in the royal favour. Yours would be supreme orders. But the Vultures are a mercenary order, a Wolf captain pointed out. Meliadus shrugged. They have proved loyal to Gran Britain, and it could be argued that many of our own orders are moribund, that fresh blood is needed in the Dark Empire. Another Vulture captain spoke thoughtfully. So Flana would be our Queen Empress. And you, Baron? Regent and consort. I shall marry Flana and aid her rule. You would truly be King Emperor in all but name, said the same Vulture captain. I would be powerful, it is true, but Flana is of the royal blood, not I. She is your Queen Empress by right of ancestry. I shall merely be supreme warlord and leave the other affairs of state to her, for war's my life, gentlemen, and I seek only to improve the manner in which our wars are conducted. The captains seemed satisfied. So it's all in play. And I'm sure this will feed, somewhat handily into the plans of Hawkmoon and Derek and Brass and the others. Because as it happens, the final chapter that we're going to talk about today, the heroes return to Castle Brass. Hawkmoon smiles and laughs and gets some loving, which is nice.
Finally.
Don't have to be super miserable. It says that Hawkmoon laughed and strode forward, putting his arms around her and kissing at her tears. Yeah. Tasting the salt on her cheeks, no doubt. Weirdo. But Hawkmoon's back. Everybody's happy. The heroes are happy. Oladan's happy because he's actually featured in a book for the first time in about 280 pages. And Hawkmoon gets to spend the night with his missus. And they sit with full bellies by a fire and they discuss potentially what they're going to do. And they're going to take on the whole Dark Empire. Several million warriors on the side of Gran Breton. And Count Brass says, we have about 500 Camargians left at Castle Brass. Derek says, we have more than 500. You forget the Legion of the Dawn. Brass says, well, we've got about 1,000 men. To be conservative, 1,500 warriors against several million. Hawkmoon also says, we have the Red Amulet and the Rings of Mygan. I forgot about the Red Amulet. He's got the... What did the Mad God's Amulet do? I can't even bloody remember.
It gave him, super killing man powers and strength and... Yeah, he was just speed, strength, and the ability to kill everything.
Yeah. And did we find out in the last book that he had to leave the amulet? We had a discussion about this in the last book. It's like, what happened to the amulet? Did Mike just forget about it?
Something like that. Yeah. There was some throwaway line where it was like, oh, too bad we don't have the amulet right now.
Yeah.
There was something like that at the beginning of this book, too, where it was just like, oh, yeah, the rings, they have the serpents blow them to the island of the Runestaff or whatever, to Denark, and then at some point there's a throwaway line where like, oh yeah, don't we have the rings? Oh, too bad we forgot about them, and that's literally it. That's literally it.
Yeah.
I forgot where exactly. I just made a mental note. I was like, all right, Mike is trying to just get this plot going.
Yeah, it's just sort of like, oh, have you still got the rings? It's because it's typing at such a fucking colossal pace. It's probably thinking, oh, the rings. So it's just like it just has Hawkmoon says to Derek, have you still got the rings?
Yeah.
And Derek's like, oh yeah.
We're here now. It was after they got off of the island. They're like, oh yeah, we had the rings the whole time, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah. So yeah, they've got the rings are back. the red amulet of the Mad God is back. They've got the Sword of the Dawn. It's all good. They explained to Hawkmoon that Oladan said to Hawkmoon, we forgot to tell you, I suppose, that Elvarez Atoza escaped. He killed his guard while he was out riding, returned here, recovered his ring and vanished. I leapt into that with no warning.
What? Okay.
This is the very end of chapter 6.
Oh, yeah. There we go. Okay.
Yeah. While Count Brass was away, Oladan said to Hawkmoon, we forgot to tell you, I suppose, that Elvarez Atoza escaped. He killed his guard while he was out riding, returned here, recovered his ring and vanished.
That is bad news. He might have returned to Londra.
Exactly. We're very vulnerable at this moment, friend Hawkmoon. Count Brass came back with the maps. Now, let's see. An hour later, Hawkmoon got up and looked at Yzelda's hand, bid good nights to his friends, and followed his wife to their apartments. 5 hours later, they were still awake, lying in each other's arms. It was then that she told him they were to have a child. He accepted the news in silence, merely kissed her and held her closer, but when she was asleep, he got up and went to the window, staring out over the reeds and lagoons of the Camargue, thinking to himself that now he had something even more important to fight for than an ideal. He hoped he would live to see his child. He hoped his child would be born, even if he did not live. The end of this episode.
There you go.
He's now got so she's got a bun in the oven now as well.
Right.
So it's got additional motivation. And of course, as we'll find as we proceed through these books, of course, because we've got the second half of the Runestaff to go, but we've also got the Castle Brass trilogy, don't we? And this whole concept of family and fate and what happens all gets a bit weird.
Very
but
weird.
More on that further down the line. So there we go, Dave. An interesting time to be reading this book.
Indeed.
I think we'll have to follow up on this one fairly quickly and keep that anger alive.
Oh, trust me. That's not going anywhere for 4 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's fucking worse to come, isn't there?
Yep. all downhill from here. One thing that was kind of interesting that kind of struck me too is just seeing all the fascists turning on themselves now at the end of this book, which is kind of the day-to-day American experience. Oh, this guy's out now, that guy's out of the administration. They swore in this guy just coming and going, and that was how it was, because it's just all led by egomaniacs and power control freaks who can't stand anyone else, maybe getting more of it than them.
It's going to be a really interesting thing to observe, isn't it?
Fuck.
I mean, we said earlier that, it's in many ways it's a fucking depressing thing to see happening in the world, and it's a frustrating thing, and it gets our woke liberal tears going, doesn't it? But on the other hand, inevitably that these people will turn on each other, because they always do.
And they already are starting, and it's just, I mean, we're literally we're recording this. It's been a week.
Yeah.
It's literally, oh my God, it's only been a fucking week. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Wow.
But they're a specific brand, these modern populists, and they are largely easily identifiable by their rank incompetence when it comes to doing the most basic things. I think what makes it, a little bit more difficult on this occasion is that all these billionaire tech bros are on board with it all. But, it won't be long before these idiots are challenging each other to fucking octagon fights again, like they were doing 2 years ago, or whatever the fuck it was. It won't be long before they're falling out. I mean, the worst one, the fucking Nazi salute dickhead, he's got zero self-control. He has got zero discipline or self-awareness.
He's huffing ketamine all goddamn day or whatever the fuck he's doing. Playing Diablo 4 and Path of Exile 2.
He pays someone else to watch.
Playing other people to fucking play him, just so we can brag about video game skills. That's the fragile ego of this idiot, this moron, and it just shows the complete emptiness within all of these people.
Well, at the end of the day, we have to sit within Castle Brass and plot the downfall of these fucking idiots, don't we? Because
basically,
they will almost always do it to themselves. It's just how much damage they do along the way, isn't it?
That's the one. And will it be so bad? How long to recover from it? Will we ever fully recover from it? I mean, it's just insane.
Yeah, and this is the problem, isn't it? Because these fuckers they can do some damage in the space of 4 years that can take a generation to undo.
Yeah, we already have some nut who's, bringing in a bill to try and pass in the House to be able to give Trump a third term. So that's exciting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. I suppose the only thing that could potentially save it from that is, I don't know, heart disease or diabetes or...
Oh, that's inevitable.
Yeah.
But then you have that creep J.D. Vance who's just ready to take the reins, and that guy's just a creepy, creepy bastard.
Yeah, I don't think, though, that if Trump succumbs to all the burgers, at some point over the next 4 years, I mean, he's already wearing fucking nappies, isn't he? So he doesn't shit himself on the golf course and everything else.
Yeah, and he's already got that dementia lean.
Once you've got to the point where he's incapable of even maintaining the support of the idiots around him, and it becomes J.D. Vance, that guy has got... I remember someone once saying, I can't remember where it came from, but I remember someone saying, I can't remember, I saw it on TV, but someone said in order to denigrate someone, it was the most brilliant insult I've ever heard. They said that this guy had the eyes of a failed rapist.
Basically.
And that is J.D. Vance. He looks fucking dead behind the eyes.
Yep.
And if he might become president by dint of the fact that he's vice president.
Yeah.
But could that guy get fucking elected? Mind you, I never thought Trump would get elected first time. So
that's the thing. Who the fuck
ignore
knows?
Me.
It could be
what
anything.
The fuck do I know?
Yeah, nobody did, and then here we are, second term. Well, I'll tell you one thing. If J.D. Vance becomes president, I think the upholsterers will be quite busy.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it the case that going back a while though, he was one of these guys who were like anti-Trump?
Yeah, well, I mean, they all were, and he's the type who will literally, I mean, if you watched his debate or anything like that, this is the type of guy who will just lie out of his fucking ass and the side of his mouth and say whatever the fuck it takes to get whatever result. He's a complete sociopath. Yeah, and that eyeliner. God, have you seen the photos? Like the presidential
No,
photos of him and Vance, they look straight up spooky.
really.
It looks like the photographer truly captured both of their essences, and it is horrifying.
Maybe JD Vance is like playing a long con. And when Trump keels over, he'll go, surprise! I'm all for Medicaid.
I don't know about that one, but I'd be surprised. Here's even more Christian nationalism, crazy stuff going on. But yeah, it's dark times.
Yeah. Well, you know what? At least we've got a SÖNUS album to look forward to.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
And I will say I do. There's a little nod to the Hawkmoon series in one of the songs. I have a lyric in there: "Death to life."
Nice.
There you go. So listen for that. It's on the title
Yeah.
track.
I will do. So on that awesome Hawkmoon-esque note, let's say death to life. And I will see you on the other side when we come back for Runestaff Part 2.
There you go. Goodbye, everybody. Stay strong.
Many thanks to Dave for coming back to continue our musings on the first Hawkmoon saga and share his insights and feelings into the current political situation over the pond. It'll be interesting to see how that progresses by the time we do part 2, or degenerates, who knows. You can find Dave's music at sonusrocks.bandcamp.com and I'll link to the page in the show notes. You'll find there the 2 first SÖNUS albums, Worlds Undreamed Of and Usurper of the Universe, and we'll keep you posted regarding album number 3. And don't forget, the O in SÖNUS has a number out. We also thought it apt that we play out this show with a suitable SÖNUS cut, so stay tuned to the end and listen to Nuclear God. On the subject of those Grand Britannian gods, the answers are out there, and I have found them in days long past, but forgotten them again, as is appropriate, I suppose, for ancient gods from pre-cataclysm days. Although I remembered one of them after I hit the sofa post-recording, but what the hell, I'm still too lazy to look at Bland Sacredid, so tell us anyway, and we'll run through them next time out. And thanks as always to our patrons, first those without tier, Anthony Piconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster and Sebastian Weetabix, and our chaos engineers Ed Von Stout, Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Spong, Andrew Van Ness, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Ben Hagar, Brandon Mays, Dan Charnley, Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman of course, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Jupp, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Matt Saltz, Michael Hopwood, Nick Hopkinson, Ofer Ziv, Paul McRandall, PJ Cooper, Scott Butler, Simon Perrins, and of course thanks to our crafty jugaderos, Adrian Tchaikovsky, Brian Henderson, Christian Hundal, Graham Holden, Kevin Williams, Liam Toner, Loz, Mark Taylor, Matthew Broom, Murray Palmer, Sean Twist, Toby White, Taylor Lavery, Mark Buckley, and, new to the Don Blass, but certainly not new to me after having shared a trip on the seas of fate at the Tolkien Moorcock Weekender a couple of years ago, and having sunk a few liveners at the Port Street Beer House post-Grogmeet. More on Grogmeet soon. Chris Sharp. As ever, with new arrivals, we exchanged scrolls, and Chris wrote, "Hi Andy, it was great to see you and finally meet Phil too. As I said, I feel I owe you, as I've been enjoying the podcast gratis for too long now. So my history of Moorcock and genre fiction does not have a very auspicious start, I'm afraid. I grew up in a house filled with books, and parents whose principal hobby was reading, so it was an enduring pain to them that I displayed a marked disinterest in reading anything other than comics. But my tastes have been in genre fiction, in the wider sense, from almost as long as I can remember. One of the first films I saw at the pictures aged 4 was The Golden Voyage of Sinbad when it first came out, which had a profound and formative effect on my tastes and interests. From then on, I had a voracious appetite for all things fantasy and sci-fi throughout my childhood, but only in film, TV and comic form until I finally got round to reading The Lord of the Rings when I was about 18, and that was the thing that suddenly activated the reader gene in me. However, by then I had started uni and was getting into grown-up stuff, and my diet changed to literary rather than pulpy. It wasn't until I came out of the deep freeze in 2013, when my son asked me to run a game of D&D for him and his friends, that I suddenly discovered the previously ignored Appendix N of my first edition DM's guide. Obviously aware of the Conan books, but by now, having turned into a literary snob, I bought a collection of Robert E. Howard Conan tales on Kindle to help restore my fantasy/D&D consciousness. At first, it felt like a guilty pleasure to read pulp novels, but I quickly realised they were far better than I had imagined, and I'd been an idiot. I was reconnected with my roots. Suddenly, I was scouring second-hand shops and eBay as I went through Gary's list to try and make up for criminally lost time. When I got to the Elric novels, I'd already binged on Howard, Lieber, Vance, and Poul Anderson. I know with certainty, had I read Elric when I was young, I would have hated it, so I was clearly meant to come to Moorcock only when my taste had developed and matured in readiness. Kismet. And that was when I discovered Breakfast in the Ruins, looking for information on Moorcock and which books to read, and in what order. I found your lovely podcast. It's been an invaluable guide to a Moorcock neophyte. It's funny to see how Moorcock had been present in my life all those years ago. I have memories of staring at the Rodney Matthews posters of Elric on my classroom wall in the 70s, listening to Blue Oyster Cult and Hawkwind in the 80s, all completely unaware of the references until now. So, to your question of what I would like to hear, well, I think the primary thing about your podcast for me is finding out about things I have never, and probably would never have, read. I don't listen in order to hear you talk about stuff I'm already familiar with, so that I can either nod sagely in approval or shake my fist in disagreement, but, having said that, I would love to hear you discuss some more of the other Appendix N authors, such as Jack Vance, the original Tales of the Dying Earth, Lioness, Roger Zelazny, the Amber Chronicles, Poul Anderson, Broken Sword, and Fritz Lieber, Lankmar. I don't know if it would fit into Breakfast in the Ruins, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on Lord Dunsany too. His works seem terribly overlooked, and there's some cracking stories across his oeuvre. The Sublime King of Elfland's Daughter, Don Rodriguez, and The Charwoman's Shadow, to name a few. And the next time we meet, I'd love to understand why you chose the restaurant at the top of a long-forgotten department store in Kensington as the venue for your recordings. Another Moorcock reference I'm unaware of? Looking forward to seeing you both in Leamington later this year. Take care, Chris. Great to see you again too, Chris. You must have had a groovy school teacher is all I can say, and thanks to our beer-fueled yakking, we will indeed see you at the Owlbear and Wizards staff later this year. Some suggestions there are definitely on the itinerary, and, as it happens, I have the Fantasy Masterworks Dunsany collection just behind me. It turns out that The King of Elfland's Daughter is on the list of the 100 best fantasy books as selected by James Cawthorne and Mike too, so that places it firmly in scope. I've discussed Jack Vance as a subject with Adrian Tchaikovsky for coverage in the spring, and Nine Princes in Amber is, well, over 3 years after Steve Round requested it, creeping up the itinerary again after my recent natter with Tash for episode 101. Going back even further, old bud Nis suggested Lord of Light too. Unfortunately, I've lost contact with Nis since deleting the Breakfast in the Ruins account from the Ketamine Nazis platform, but Nis, if you're listening, drop me a line. And eternal thanks to our patron demons, Action Edmonds, Alistair Davison, Andrew Clark, Andy Darby, David Lee, Derek Clunan, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Glenn Sawyer, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, Janie Stim, Jason Vogel, Joachim Sund, Joe Monty, Johan Hiapa, Jonathan Sharp, Lee Gary, Marius Latauskas, Mark Hebden, Miles Reed-Labato, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, Tony Malazzo, the OG patron Norman Beresford, and last but never least, Robert McMillan. Okay, enough of my blather. Don't forget you can follow us on Instagram with the handle @BreakfastRuins, for now at least. You can find me on Blue Sky, where I'm Stimbot5000. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. BITR Breakfast in the Ruins Radio is live on Radio Garden, or via the web player at breakfastintheruinsradio.blogspot.com. We have our Patreon page too, of course, and there are a few extra odds and sods on there. Stay tuned to worship your nuclear god in a few moments, but in the meantime, take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.
I've been thinking about burning down the cosmos. It says